Good afternoon. This is Speedway Jeff. I'm one of the owners of A2Z Radio. And over to my right is Bob Berryhill. And Bob is, I hate to use this term, but it is very appropriate, a legend in the music world. And over to his right is
LilWilly from A2Z Radio. Welcome, everybody, to ROCKNPOD 2023.
And we're going to kind of trade off different questions. I'm going to start out with Bob, if you can talk to us about how you got your start in music.
Well, I took a trip to Hawaii in 1960 on the 707 jet. If you haven't been on one of those, you haven't been flying yet. Anyway, a little rough going over, but landed in Hawaii at the Aloha airport, opened the door, walked down the ramp down to the ground, which is what they did in 1960, and walked out and said, orchids. And all the fine fragrances. But no, I went to a hula show and at the Kaiser Hawaiian Village, and a guy came out and played, you might say, the most fantastic ukulele instrumental music I'd ever heard. So that got me real excited. I was only 13 years old, so I had to start out just basically grabbing him the next morning as he walked through the foyer of the hotel and said, "Take me to an ukulele store and pick out an ukulele for me." So that's kind of what got me started on Kamaka ukulele. So that's what got me started in music.
And then the rest is history.
Yeah, sort of the rest is history, but it did take a long time.
And with me being the gear guy, the correct pronunciation is ukulele?
Ukulele.
Okay, so it's not the U.
Right.
Okay, ooh. Okay.
Yeah, I had to learn that from a Hawaiian.
The more you know. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, there you go.
So then you really came to be known as a member of the Surfaris.
Right.
So my first curiosity was that the original name of the band, or who came up with it? How did that come about?
Well, we started out, we were only sophomores in high school, so we were like 15 years old, and we went to Azusa, California, which is A to Z in the USA, that's how you spell it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we went out there, and Dale Smallin was our manager, and one night we were at his studio rehearsing for a sock hop the next weekend, and they said, "Hey, boys, what are you going to call yourself?" And we go, "Well, there was Surfin' Safari," which was already a name being used by the Beach Boys, and we thought, Safari's cool, but why don't we spell it as surf? S-U-R-F-A-R-I-S. We thought we were being real clever, so we kind of came up with it one night at our first rehearsal studio night.
So, and the Surfaris get your start. You're just like garage band, just a bunch of kids just playing around.
Well, you know what? It goes back quite a ways. Actually, sophomore in high school, Pat Conley, our original bass player, was a bad boy. Got kicked out of high school. He got and in those days, they didn't have like a place to put you continuing, so he had to go to Catholic school because his mom and dad were Catholics. So he went to Catholic high school, and he calls me one Saturday afternoon and says, "Hey, Bob, can we come over and practice?" So Jim Fuller, the other guitar player, and Pat come over to my house on a Saturday, and that happened a lot because I had a music room with all my guitars and everything, and they sat down. In fact, Pat Conley didn't have a bass guitar. That was our bass player. So he played my Telecaster, and Fuller had a dual sonic, and I had a Jazzmaster. We plugged into my Bandmaster amplifier because you had 3 plug-ins in those days. All the amps today just have 1, it looks like. But anyway, there were 3. So we all sat down and played for about a half an hour. And at the end of the 3 hours, Pat Conley goes, "Hey, Bob, we have a concert to do tonight. You want to come and play it?" I said, "Well, sure, but we don't have a drummer." What response would you expect? "We're going to meet the drummer there." So as a band member, you never want to just show up and never have rehearsed with a drummer. But fortunately, we all knew Dick Dale's Surfer's Choice album, and we all knew the Ventures album with Ventures' Walk Don't Run. Yeah. So I played all the Ventures songs. Jim Fuller played all the Dick Dale songs. And Ron Wilson was such a great drummer that he could play just about anything. So he just kind of played, and we thought, okay, that's our first night together on a Saturday night, and then the next week we started the band.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm checking my notes here. So you go in, you're going to a recording studio, but it wasn't Wipeout. It was
Oh, no.
it was Surfer Joe.
Yeah, well, what happened was we were again at Dale Smollen's studio in Azusa, and one night in November of '62, Ron Wilson comes in, starts setting up his drums, gets all set up, and goes, "Hey, Bob, I had a dream about a song called Surfer Joe," because just the night before he had dreamed about a song, and he came in and he had his words all written down on some envelope or something, and he says, "Let me sing it for you." So he starts playing his drums, and I said, "Well, let me put some chords to this and a background." So after about an hour, we had the music to it, and we got it all done. And Dale Smollen says, "Hey, that's a cool song. Sounds like a Beach Boys song. Why don't we go and record that?" "Oh, great. We're going to go to Hawaii." And he goes, "We're going to go to Hollywood." And he says, "Well, no, you don't have enough money to go there." So we got $150 together, drove out to Cucamonga, California, where a guy named Paul Buff. Now, Paul Buff is a recording engineer, came to here, and he has Paul C. Buff electronic company that sells photographic equipment. But in these days, he had started a studio from his homemade stuff that he was in the Marine Corps, and he made his own studio in Cucamonga. And so we went in to record Surfer Joe, and then once we had recorded Surfer Joe, then the talkback button, which is a great button, push it down and you say, "Boys, you need a second song for your 45. We said, well, we hadn't written another song. So we went to the studio with one song, and Ron Wilson starts playing the Wipeout beat. And I go, well, we better put some guitar chords and a bass line and a melody, or this is going to be a Sandy Nelson Let There Be Drums thing. And so we started putting da 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 da. Started getting that going, and then we said, okay, we'll have a break, big chord break, drum solo, and we did it one time. They said, well, boys, play it one more time. So we played it one more time. Now we're only 15 years old. We don't know. We've never been to a studio before, and so we played it the third time. And he goes, okay, we got it. That's how Wipeout was born.
And luckily you remembered how to play it the next time.
Well, we had to wait till the 45 came out because we never played it again until 2 weeks later.
So now, while you're here in the studio, I'm kind of the gear guy.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that the bass player was using the telly.
Yeah.
When they were rehearsing.
Yeah.
Did he have a bass by the time you guys went to the studio?
Well, that was amazing. He brought a bass that he borrowed from his cousin. And that was the first night he ever played bass guitar.
Okay.
He never had a bass guitar.
And so you were playing
Jazzmaster.
A Jazzmaster.
Yeah, I had a '62 Jazzmaster that I had purchased, and Jim Fuller had a Dual Sonic, and Pat brought a Harmony bass.
Okay.
So if you look on the original Wipeout album, the picture on the back shows his original Harmony bass, and the drummer played a Ludwig set of drums, sort of a Sunburst-looking set, and then Fuller had his Dual Sonic, but after we did that, he bought a Stratocaster.
So you had 4 15-year-olds, right?
No, actually 3 15-year-olds and a 17-year-old.
Okay, so 3 15-year-olds and a 17-year-old
Yeah.
who didn't have a 6-figure music arranger involved.
No.
Go into the studio and record a legendary song on the second cut.
Yep.
That's just amazing. I don't know anybody. If you're not getting goosebumps from that, you're not alive. I'll just tell you that.
It was kind of like energy. When you're only 15, you get excited, and when you have a drummer like Ron Wilson. Now, if you talk to the drummer from The Who, from the Queen, from Led Zeppelin, they all say Ron Wilson was their inspiration to become drummers. And that's the kind of drummer Ronnie was. Ronnie was like a mix of all three. You know how wild those three drummers were? Ronnie was wilder than any of those guys. He would literally stand on his drums and beat the heck out of them, break his cymbals, holes in his drum. By the end of the night, he'd have to rebuild his drum set. And remember, we didn't have any amplification in those days. So there was no miking of the drums. He set up his drum in the front of the stage, and we set our amps behind that because Ronnie was the star of the show, because he was out there doing cadences, and he'd write things instantaneously for songs that we would record later on, and he would sing from out there. And our bass player would go back and play the drums, and he'd run all over the stage like John Cougar Mellencamp running around the stage, climbing the walls. The guy was nuts, but he was just the consummate showman that allowed us to have, we had to catch up to be part of his show, and that would give us the energy to do that.
So now, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh us again. So we have young children, all of them minors, recording a legendary song and influencing not just punk rock, but shred guitar and massive showmanship all in one shot. That's absolutely incredible.
Well, it's like a magic night. We all came together that night. It was a cold, wintry night, rainy night out in the desert. You know, it was just like a magic night. And we were so young that we didn't have driver's licenses. So our parents had to drive us to the studio, you know.
Bless your parents.
Yeah. Well, my mom and dad were very much into country western music. And they had taken us to the Town Hall Party, which was in Culver City, much like the Grand Ole Opry here. And so I had learned to watch Speedy West on steel guitar, Joe Maphis. All those kinds of inspirations were already there for me. So I kind of had a great introduction into the music world through them. Yeah.
Kind of going back to you had the recording, you have the 45. How do you get it out there?
Well, you know, that's the magic of the music business. When you're 15 years old, you don't know how to do any of that. And so what happened is that Dale Smallin and Paul Buff being the engineer, he had a PAL Studios. He took the record after we got what happened is that we produced a 45 on DFS. And if you want to get one of those, they're $2,000 on eBay. There's only 100 of them, so they're limited. But anyway, we're on Dot Records, which is right across the street right there, is Dot Records. So anyway, what happened is that we shopped it around. I mean, in those days, you would give your record to a promoter or something. He would take it to like Art LeBeau. You know who Art LeBeau was? He was the oldest but goodies producer. He passed on it. He didn't like it. Finally, a guy named George Hoka came into PAL Studios, and Paul Buff gave him the 45, and he took it to Los Angeles to Merritt Distributing Company. Now, sitting at a desk was a guy named Richard Delvey. Now, Richard Delvey was the drummer for the Challengers, who was a big, they were kind of like a house band for the Hollywood shows. They would go and play on different TV shows like 9th Street West and all these things. Anyway, he was sitting at the desk, and George gave him the copy and said, "Hey, see what you think of Surfer Joe." Played it, and he went, "Well, flip it over." Flips it over, plays Wipeout, and goes, "Yeah, that's a cool song." He calls John Maniscalco. Now, John Maniscalco owns Princess Records, and he wrote Good Golly Miss Molly, worked with Little Richard. And he said, "Yeah, that's a hit record. Let's sign the boys, and we'll put them on Princess." And then what happened is he paid us, I think it was $200 or something. We signed this little contract. Now, what was interesting is that John and Richard both came to my house out in Glendora, California, which is a little 2-bit suburb outside of LA. Anyway, he comes to the house, and they had already made a deal with Dot Records that we didn't know about. So they came out, and they're getting nervous. And one of the famous quotes, which I talked to John 50 years after, I said, "When you were there, you were so upset. You asked Delvey, where's my Milltowns?" I mean, he was getting an acid stomach because we had 5 sets of parents. Now, can you sit in a room with 5 sets of parents and get them to agree on anything? No, you can't do that. But we went ahead and signed the contracts anyway because we're stupid, right? But we figured, why not? You know, we're only 15. So we signed the contracts. He gave us a couple $100, and they took off. Well, 2 weeks later, it's released on Dot Records. And we didn't sign with Dot Records. We signed with Princess. So what happened there is the record then gets on AM radio. And what happened is John Maniscalco took the 45 and mailed it to KYNO in Fresno. Now, Johnny Hyde had a midnight make it or break it show. So they played it at midnight on a Monday, and by Thursday it was the most requested song. Well, what happened is after it got off of that, then Randy Wood from Dot Records, which is their booth over there, called the Johnny Hyde and said, "Do you have any new songs?" And he says, "Yeah, I got this Wipeout thing." So it got mailed from Hollywood to Fresno, and then from Fresno back to Hollywood to his desk. He puts it on the player, plays it, and goes, "Yeah, that's a hit. We're going to put that on Dot." Now, this is all happening. We don't know all this is happening, right? And so I found out this, 3 years later in a deposition that they had to do because of the legal battle we got into to get our contracts. But anyway, it got into his office. He put it on the radio, and then it went 2 weeks later. It was like on L.A. 3 months later, it was number 2 in the United States. In September, it was like number 11 in England. So it just kind of went around the world. Snowballed, yeah.
And so kind of going along with that, because you mentioned depositions.
Mm-hmm.
So rights, recordings, how does that all work out when you're 15?
Well, you have to sue everybody.
Where you are today.
So what would happen was another thing had to happen. I mean, Wipeout is one of those things that dominoes had to fall, and you couldn't miss one of them. But this one was a crazy one. Okay, you have a hit record. You're number one. We're playing on every TV show. We're playing in the Hollywood Bowl. We're playing, all the big concerts. We're playing with the Beach Boys, Roy Orbison, all the early doo-wop groups. We're playing on all these shows. Well, our manager comes to us and says, "Boys, you need to do an album to support your single." And we went, "Oh, sure, no problem." Well, this is the first week in June of 1963. And we said, "Okay, we're going to go to Hollywood this time, right?" He goes, "No, we're going back to PAL Records." So we went back out there, and in one day, we recorded all the songs on the album. One day. And we set up and played like we did a concert. We just played it. And at the end of it, he said, "Okay, we got it." And now that was like on a Saturday, right? Well, Monday, the album is released worldwide. Now, in 1963, how do you record an album, take all the photography, do all the printing and pressing in one weekend? You can't do that, right? And so what happened is that Dale then brings our album to us and goes, "Well, listen to it." So we listen to it and we go, "Well, it's great. Wipeout and Surfer Joe are our songs, our master, but the other songs don't sound like us." And we go, "Oh." So what happened is the manager, actually Richard Dilley, had back in April recorded all of those songs and didn't tell us. Never asked us to come to the recording studio. And our manager was even there. And he told them, as I saw in the deposition at the trial, goes, "Well, the boys are really going to be pissed because they didn't get to record their own album." And because I said, "Well, we definitely were." So what happened is on the back of the LP, you'll see a picture of 5 guys on the back, okay? Well, our sax player was an old guy. He was 13 years old. And his dad saw the album and found out that Jim Pash was not on the album because it was only the 4 of us: Jim Fuller, Pat Conley, Ron Wilson, Bob Berryhill, myself. So Jim Pash was not officially on the album, but his picture was on the album. So his dad sues Dot Records and gets us kicked off the album, off the label, for fraud. And so we're going, "Oh no, we've just lost our record." So we're sitting there going, "Now what are we going to do?" Well, then we go to Hollywood. I don't know if you've been to Studio City, these big black tower buildings. Inside are these super high-priced lawyers. And so they bring us up to this top floor of this big building and said, "You're the Surfaris, right, Bob?" "Yeah." "And we're going to court." So that started a whole 3-year process of going through it. But it's the only way you make any money in this business is if you have legal representation. So he took us downstairs and said, "Okay, now we're going to go to court." And we're on the side room, and they bring us into the courtroom and go, "Are you the," yeah, and we say our name, and we go back out. And they're in there talking for hours and go through, and fortunately, we got our publishing rights and writers' rights, and we got put on Decca Records, which is a London label out of New York. So we got on Decca, and that's where we did our next 6 albums. We did them on Decca, and we got to be us. So that was what we did.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great story.
Yeah. Well, it's the life. I've been, like I say, I started when I was 15. I'm a little older than that now, so we been doing it a long time. Yeah.
So the signing with Decca, that was in
1963, September.
1963. So all of this is happening in 1963.
Oh, yeah. It's before Kennedy was
It's
shot.
like, what kind of miracles are we talking about here? All of this stuff is happening in 1963 when 4 guys were still on the other side of the pond that nobody knew about.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Until they knew about you.
Well, let me give you...
Then we knew about them.
Okay, so here we are in 63. We've got a #1 record. We're asked to go to Australia for a tour, right? So we go, oh, that's cool. So January of 1964, we're in Australia, and we're the headliners of a tour with the Beach Boys, Roy Orbison, and Paul and Paula, and a group called the Joy Boys out of Australia, who were the backup band for Roy and Paul and Paula. So we're down there in 1963 January, and in between shows, we went to a theater. In the theater, between the movie was a 1-minute short video of a band that was playing. And Brian Wilson is sitting there, Carl Wilson is sitting there, Dennis Wilson is sitting there, Mike Love is sitting there. We're all in a row, right? And at the end of the video, Brian Wilson stands up and goes, "They'll never make it." Now, who do you think that was? The Beatles. This is 1963. Now, it goes even crazier because Roy Orbison had not released Pretty Woman yet. He flies from Australia back to England and releases Pretty Woman before the Beatles can hit, so that he gets that record going before they came out and killed everybody.
Smart man.
Yeah. So we're in Australia. We have a fantastic tour. We come back to L.A. February 7th, 1964 is the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan brings out these 4 mop heads, right? Now, we have these Donato haircuts, we've got we're wearing uniforms, and we all sit in front of the TV. It was a black and white TV, sitting there watching these 4 guys come out and sing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and "She Loves You" or whatever they sing. And I looked at that and I went, wow. Music just died for the surf music. Because remember, we were the transition between rock and roll, which is where everybody danced the bop, which is holding hands, right? Well, we created the surfer stomp, which was you don't hold on to anybody anymore. So we started dancing with those. And we also had surfing, because everybody wanted to ride the new plastic surfboards. We had that, plus surf clothes, all the surf clothes, Huarache sandals, and the Bleedy Madre shirts. So we created surf music, surfboards, surf dancing, surf clothes, all at the same time. And all of that was done by the time Kennedy was shot in 63, in November. So it was kind of like we did all that in less than a year, or less than 6 months. Wow. So it was amazing. Yeah.
Wild.
That's incredible.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we have time to open it up to the crowd?
Anybody have questions?
Yeah,
We've got a
I think
mic for you. There's our micster. He's got to get it.
Oh, it's back behind us.
Okay, he's got it laying down.
Watch him move
Yeah.
with
There
great
we go.
dexterity and rapid speed.
Testing.
I know Brian Wilson was pissed when the Beatles made famous, right?
Well, Brian Wilson was super competitive. That's why he went in his bedroom and took drugs. Because on AM radio, what were you guys doing back then? Hey, fans, do you want to hear a Beach Boy song or do you want to hear a Beatles song? Well, when it first started, the Beach Boys were winning. And then after about 3 months, the Beatles were winning. And he was so pissed that he couldn't see straight that he basically burned his brain out on taking drugs.
Well, anyway, my question is this.
Yeah.
What are you doing right now? Are you still doing music or?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like as the world goes on, I retired from doing things in California. And I started in 1960, when I was 65 years old. I decided to retire from whatever I was doing there and just do music full time. And so I do music publishing, we write, record, and tour. I have my wife as my bass player, for you ladies out there. And my 2 sons, Devin plays guitar, and my Joel is my younger son, plays drums. So basically, we have a family band because the other guys have all passed away, okay? I have a good wife. That's why I'm alive. You know, without that leadership, you might say. So I'm still doing music, and I've done 4 or 5 of these kinds of shows over the years. But I try to just pick and choose what's fun to do, which is great to be with the fans. And we just released the new 60th anniversary Wipeout album, vinyl, that's available right over there, if you'd like to get one of those.
That's what I was going to mention, that it'd be available at your booth. So I'm going to be over there later.
Okay, who out there is a great guitar player? Let's have some questions from a guitar player. We got any guitar players out there?
Not a guitar.
Drummers.
We'll take your question, though.
Yeah, we'll take your question, though. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, talk about what happened. You said after the Beatles showed up and it kind of changed everything. What happened to the Surfaris after that? I mean, just how'd your life change after that moment?
Well, it was day and night. We had a producer named Charles Bud Dant, who in September of '63, when we just signed with Decca, became our producer. Now, what was interesting, he was a producer of Hawaiian music. So, let me borrow my water a second. He was the guy that Decca thought could handle 4 teenagers and play instrumental music. And so our first album was called Surfaris Play. And again, just like we did when we went to the studio to do the Wipeout album, we just sit up and played. Now, at this time, we had 3 Showman amps, and I had my Jazzmaster, Stratocaster, Precision bass. Pat didn't have a bass the night we did Wipeout, but he brought his cousin's Harmony bass. And Ronnie bought a new Camco set of drums. So we just set up in a big studio at United or Western or Capitol, and we would just play. So what happened was we went from an all-instrumental band to an all-vocal band. So what happened was that Ron Wilson was a good singer. He could sing like Mike Love and Brian and those guys. So what they found out is that the Decca's producer, they gave us a new producer, which is, suddenly I can't remember his name. He wrote 409 with Brian Wilson. You know, the guys who did that. I'll think of it here. Anyway, they gave us a new producer and said, boys, you need a new sound. And so he said, okay, we're going to do these songs. And he would pick the songs, and they were vocals. Now, we were only an instrumental band, so we had to add vocalists. So we had Chuck Girard, who lives here in Nashville, and Joe Kelly. We added Richie Podler, Bill Cooper. They wanted to flesh out our sound, right? And so we suddenly started the trend of having session guys in your studio. Part of that, it was just the 5 of us would show up and play. And so we started recording top 40 songs. Ron would write, like, I Want to Take a Trip to the Islands, So Get Out. He started writing his own vocals, and we'd rehearse those and play those. And so that next year, we did 6 albums in total of all these kinds of songs, but it was like an effort to try to recapture what we had before. Well, you can't do that. You know, it's kind of like once you're a heavy metal guy, what are you going to do? You know, you're going to change to pop. You know, it isn't going to happen. But we thought, because remember, guys, we started when we were 15, and I wasn't 18 until 1965. So we had 2 years of still being just kids. And so what happened was by the time you're 18, the Beatles, the Stones, that's the kind of music that people wanted to hear. So what we did is because we didn't play any Beach Boys songs and any of the songs that are vocals on any of our albums except Surfer Joe, and we picked up playing Beatles songs, Rolling Stones songs, Them, Us, all the pronoun bands that came out. We just basically played what people wanted to hear because we were a dance band. And people stopped dancing after a while because they wanted to sit down and listen to somebody sing a protest song. And we're going, well, we're not Bob Dylan, you know, we're a bunch of surfers, because we were all surfers. And so basically, we had to change our style. And we did that we did that until 1967, when the Vietnam War was raging. Several of the guys got drafted or moved on to Canada. You know, I got married, had a child, which is my older son, Devin. My wife and I went back to school. I got my degree in education. My wife got a PhD in art history. So we kind of did those kind of things. And then about in the 70s, they had a 1973 concert. Okay. They had a 1973 first International Surfer Stomp. And then in 1980, Disneyland said, hey, we want to bring a whole surf party. So we got back in 80s and did that. And then in the 90s and then 2000, my two sons joined the band because the other guys had basically passed away. So I've been doing that. Okay. Oh, question. In the back there.
I think.
Go ahead. You got 1 minute.
I think we need to wrap, but
Yeah.
oh, you'll do it. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
One last question. Oh, turn it on.
Let's see.
Look at this. The miracle of technology. Oh, not working. One more time.
Hello. Oh, I just wanted to know if you're keeping up with any of the modern surf music, like the Allah Allahs that have a retro sound.
Yeah, we're going to be in July. The end of June, the 24th. We're going to be going to Italy for the Surfer Joe Festival, and there's going to be all these new surf bands there, and we're going to headline the show. But we're going to get to hear the latest surf music out there. So yeah.
Right. Well, I grew up down on South Beach in the mid '60s, and your music was huge down in South Florida at the time, down on Surfside, which is where I grew up.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
for us old surfers who've been doing it forever, man, we love you guys.
Yeah. So we keep writing new songs and trying to come up with a new way to make a mousetrap, to make it better, that kind of thing. So we keep doing it.
Okay, I'd like to thank Bob for joining us. I'd like to thank you for the audience for joining us, and for Chris and the entire ROCKNPOD team hosting the event, and for all the help here at the stage themselves. And thank you the most for the questions. Those have been a really big help, and I hope everybody enjoys their day. Give it up for Bob Berryhill.
All right, thank you.